Well, welcome in everybody, Stars fans and Seattle Kraken fans alike. This is Dane Lewis with the Locked On Stars podcast, joined by Erica Ayala of Locked On Seattle Kraken. Erica, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Dane. It's great to make your acquaintance. I'm glad we're doing this Squadcast, as I like to say today.
Yes, absolutely. I'm very excited as well. I know a lot of teams kind of starting to get back into the swing of things as far as playing games. Dallas and Seattle both, respectively coming off of some COVID hiatuses. And I know the Stars recently have had, a few more players go into protocol. But glad to be collaborating with Locked On Host once again, talking about games, finding a little bit of consistency in what's been a crazy start to 2022 so far.
Indeed. Yes, indeed. So we'll see. I think this is going to be a good game. Got back into action against Colorado, but this will be a good test, I think, against Dallas for us.
Yeah, I think this will be an interesting game from both sides. And to kind of get us rolling, I want to throw some Seattle related questions your way, just to give a little bit of knowledge to the Stars listeners out there before this matchup, because these two teams have never met up before, with it being Seattle's first year in the league. And so, just kind of the first question I have for you: what has been kind of the pulse of the organization and fan base this season, despite some of the struggles that the Kraken have faced early on? Clearly not, where you want to be in the standings, bottom of the division out in the Pacific, but what has kind of been the pulse of the organization and fan base throughout the first several weeks of this season?
Well, you have to obviously start with everything was brand new, quite literally building a franchise from the ground up. And there was a lot of excitement from that. And I think for those people who are either in Seattle or the Washington area, kind of the Seattle Kraken catchment area, if you will, or people who have kind of fallen in love with this team, that excitement still remains. Now, we still commiserate over things over on Locked On Kraken that seem to be quite honestly just bad habits of the team sitting at 10, 20, and 4, as you mentioned, at the bottom of the division, which a lot of people talk about obviously our division and as not being one of the more competitive divisions. And I think the struggle is certainly very real. The team is still trying to establish itself, and that being said, there are definitely some things that I talk about that as a professional organization and a group of players, you definitely want to see them refine a little bit more. So it's a little bit of a push and pull having to analyze the team from a hockey perspective. That being said, I do think that the buzz and the excitement and talking about revenge games or Seattle Kraken firsts, which I mean, that first week especially, there were a bunch of them, right? So we got to talk about that a lot. I mean, we're still just having fun with it. I think that's the overall kind of mentality and sentiment behind the Seattle Kraken fan base right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly still exciting to see, a professional team kind of emerge up there in Seattle after, basketball with the Supersonics, at least on the men's side of things, kind of disappearing. But now having a hockey team thrown into the mix with WNBA, NFL, things like that. Certainly an exciting time there. And you mentioned revenge games. And I don't know how much of revenge is on this player's mind, but I got to ask, coming from the Stars side of things, we did lose Jaime Oleksiak to you guys in the expansion draft. What have you seen from him this season, and what has kind of been his role on the team playing defenseman for this Kraken squad?
Or well, Alexiak is one of those players that, especially early on, we didn't have in the roster right away. We've been dealing with everything from injuries to obviously COVID and whatnot. So, and then also being on the defenseman side of things, the Seattle Kraken defense, although when we drafted and even through free agency, we were looking at on paper big, tall defensemen. We haven't really played a big, tall game. I think Oleksiak, is definitely one of the defenders that are a little bit more reliable when we're looking on the ice, and we can kind of look to him for some of the younger defenders, which we have a great deal of those. But it's hard to gauge individually how the defensemen on the Seattle Kraken are doing. I wouldn't say that, there's too many of them that are standing out when it comes to lighting up the lamp or even collecting points. Is a very forward dominant offensive presence right now for the Seattle Kraken. So it's I think it's a little bit difficult to say with certainty, but I would say Jaime Oleksiak is not one of the defenders that I'm most worried about. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, yeah, certainly a guy that it was just weird seeing him go. There was a lot of speculation throughout last season of, would we lose a goalie because Anton Hudobin had kind of had a nice stretch dating back to the bubble in Edmonton back in 2020, and even a little bit of a nice stretch kind of in 2021. So kind of a shock to see Alexiak go. A little bit of a bittersweet departure to get to see him be a part of this new franchise, but a guy who had kind of been a under the radar player for the Stars over the past several years. And like you said, he's a bigger guy and he always provided that nice physical presence for the team. But
Yeah.
speaking of under the radar players, who would you say throughout this entire roster, whether it's a defenseman or a forward, who's kind of an underrated, under the radar kind of player that Stars fans should be on the lookout for in this matchup? Because we know some of the big names, Eberle, McCann, guys like that, but who's maybe a
Mhm.
guy that doesn't get as much spotlight on this Kraken team?
Yeah, I love that. And then also, I do want to just tap back to Alexiak real quick
Sure,
because
sure.
he is one of the defensemen who has been helping on the assist. I didn't want to make it sound like he wasn't doing anything, but again, it is still very much a forward dominant team. But to that end,
Yes.
um, players to look out for. I've been kind of singing this player's praises, especially because there was some clapback, and that's Ryan Donato. He's a player that's been around a few teams. And when we were the Seattle Kraken, that is, when we were back in San Jose, he was asked, kind of what happened here. It was by someone from the Sharks beat, kind of what happened here. And he's like, I don't know, maybe you could tell me. So he's got a little spice. Definitely kind of feels some kind of way, obviously, about what happened with the Sharks organization in particular. But I think that even though we've seen throughout his history that he can kind of come in with a real spark and hit a little bit of a lull, I don't think that we've seen that with the Seattle Kraken. He's got great energy. I think he is really gritty, which is not necessarily how I'd categorize the Seattle Kraken team as a whole. I think they could use a little more grit and a little bit more just feisty, excitable play. Obviously, Brandon Tanev, we lost to an ACL injury. He's out for the season. Jaden Schwartz, who plays just such an intelligent game and, can absorb a lot of contact, also lost him to injury, out 4 to 6 weeks. So someone like Ryan Donato, along with Yanni Gord, I think those are players that you're really going to see once Dallas and the Seattle Kraken hit the ice, that you'll see those players, or I would expect if the Seattle Kraken are playing the way they want to play, that you'll see Donato and, of course, Yanni Gord. I mean, he's really just doing everything for the Seattle Kraken right now. So those are two players for sure that I think fans that are not as familiar with the Seattle Kraken roster should look out for.
Yeah, very, very good to know. And you kind of mentioned maybe a lack of grit for the Seattle team. That leads to kind of my final question that I have. What would you say is the overall strength of this team? And in turn, what is kind of the overall identity of this team? So I guess it's kind of a two-headed question. What is the strength of the team? And then how does that kind of align to what their identity is so far this season?
I'd say a strength of the team, especially given the record and some of the, quite honestly, dry spells for some of the guys and the losing streaks that we've gone through, is that they are pretty even keeled. And that can be difficult when you're not seeing the results that you want. And, the Seattle Kraken are losing, games 4-3 or 5-4, right there in it. So I think they're able to maintain that even keel. But I've been talking about this on the podcast a lot. And actually, Allison Lucan, who works on the broadcast side of things and also does some analytics work, kind of like analytics 101 for the Seattle Kraken. She wrote an article about response goals. And so, on the one hand, the Seattle Kraken are just about above middle of the pack in the NHL when it comes to responding within 2 minutes after their opponent scores. So, there's a resilience there, but they're also not great at being able to keep their opponents off of the scoreboard in the 2 minutes following their own goal. So the Seattle Kraken will score a goal, and then way too often you see that we allow a goal for the opponent. So the reason that, and maybe I don't know, it's just the kind of athlete that I used to be, but I think when you get a little, you take some of that personal, I think that's a good thing sometimes. And I don't know that all of the Seattle Kraken players can kind of tune in and out, or kind of ride the ebbs and flows of those types of emotions to help kind of harness their just laser sharp focus, because some of what we're seeing is a focus issue. And, at some point you got to, have some pride, not just for the crest that you have, the team crest on the front, but also your name on the back. And so I'd like to really see every once in a while them break out of what I think is their strength, which is that they can be very even keeled and kind of stay the course. But every once in a while, I just want to see them get a little riled up and, really kind of take some pride in just saying, hey, not today. We're not going to fall into these same kind of traps. Once we score, we're not letting you score. And I think that that's the grit and the edge that we need to see more of from the Seattle Kraken.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's an interesting point if you talk about response goals. So Stars have also had stretches where they tend to, they'll score, they'll tie the game up, but then they surrender a goal right back. So there's potential that we could see a lot of offensive fireworks in this game if both of these teams fall under that. And so, yeah, a lot of respect, at least on I know on mine and several other people, sounds like yourself as well, for this Kraken team with having to play for an expansion team and, a crazy, COVID type season, similar to what we had last year. Just a lot of things to work out, but yet, they're staying so even keel and still working at it and playing in those grinded out games. And, certainly a hard, act to follow given the last expansion team that the NHL had made it all the way to the Stanley Cup. So the Vegas Golden Knights set the bar a little bit high. If I do say so, to you guys' credit for sure.
Yes, yes, indeed, and that's definitely kind of, the ghost of Vegas, that kind of is a cloud that is always over the Seattle Kraken. But when it comes to Ron Francis, the general manager, he's been very clear from the get go that this is a brand new franchise, that they're not looking to in any way, shape, or form replicate what the Vegas Golden Knights did. And honestly, some of that was just off the table. If you heard Francis talking around the expansion draft, I mean, some of those deals that we saw that Vegas was able to make, he wasn't able to get those deals. And so there was a lot of work that he and his team were doing, which is why you saw even some of what we did with goaltending come through free agency as opposed through an expansion draft. And he's also said that keeping the cap at a manageable way was important for him because he wants to play the long game. So in hearing Ron Francis say some of that, it's kind of like, this is what we have and we're sticking with it. We're going to see season 1 through. And by the end of this season, I fully expect that Ron Francis and the Seattle Kraken will have a little bit more data to go off of, and they will analyze and critique. And then in season 2 and 3, I think we'll see, they'll be a little more aggressive with making off-season moves or maybe even in-season trades. Let me tell you about Built Bar. It's the new year, so that means New Year's resolutions. And if yours is about getting fit or eating healthier, make sure you add Built Bar to the repertoire. Built Bar makes it easy to stick to your resolution because they taste so dang good, while also being around 130 calories per bar with only 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, while pumping you up with 17 grams of protein. If you compare that to any candy bar, it's not even close. It's not even close to the health benefits while also the taste. And here's an idea for the new year. Why don't you, if you've got a secret stash of sweets, just start implementing Built Bar in there. You're still going to get something that's delicious, that's covered in chocolate, that comes in all kinds of fun flavors, but you'll get all the health benefits as well. And so even if you're not a big fan of working out, you can at least have something that tastes good and will do your body good. So we want you to head over to built.com and use promo code LOCKED15. That's locked15 for 15% off your order at built.com. 15% off your order when you use promo code locked on, or excuse me, when you use promo code locked15 over at built.com. Happy snacking. Usually when we have a game day over at Locked On Kraken, we like to kind of look at the breakdown. We know that the Seattle Kraken don't have a great power play. We also talked in the first segment about those response goals, and you talked about that with Dallas too. But I wonder for you, what do you see as some of the strengths of Dallas? Because even if they maybe let up those response goals, I mean the goals against are at 2.91, so about middle of the pack for the league, but the Seattle Kraken are at a 3.68. So that's definitely a category that the Stars are winning. But for you, looking at those numbers and the goals allowed, what do you think makes it so that the Dallas Stars can kind of maintain and absorb some of that without giving up goals as or certainly not close to 4 a game?
Yeah, certainly. A huge credit of the success in that regard is definitely the goaltending for the Stars this season, which was a kind of a big question mark going into the season because they had 4 guys on the roster that could have been a starting goalie. But now the room has cleared up a little bit with the retirement of Ben Bishop. Anton Hudobin has recently been moved down to the AHL, but now might get called back up because Braden Holtby just got placed in COVID protocol on Tuesday, a few hours before we started recording. And he and Jake Ottinger, the guys that have kind of been solidified as the starting duo, are certainly, they deserve so much credit for the defensive side of things, as well as some of the defensemen on the team. John Klingberg, a guy who's been talked about a lot recently in many star circles as he's kind of surfaced in some trade rumors, feeling kind of unappreciated given the amount of effort and the amount of times he's played over the past several seasons here in Dallas, playing at a pretty high level. But even him, Miro Heiskanen, Ryan Suter has been a pretty nice offseason addition, despite what some fans might say. Certainly not perfect, and certainly I still don't think worth a 4-year deal that we signed into at age 36. But the Stars have always kind of been a defensive team for Stars fans who have watched the team religiously to even just kind of the casual NHL fan. The Stars always seem to be founded in defense, but nice to see some of the new young talent emerging offensively, like Jason Robertson, a Calder Trophy finalist last season, Rupe Hintz having a nice season in his own regard. A guy in his early 20s. So the Stars certainly, founded in, a defensive ideology, I guess, if you will, but really, really encouraging as fans of the team and as a guy who covers the team to see the team turning an offensive leaf. So that way, when they do give up those those goals in the game, early in the game, or whenever they give them up, it feels like there's always a chance that the Stars can get back in. And we've seen that a lot recently over their past few games that they've played against Florida and Pittsburgh coming out of this COVID hiatus.
I love that. Kraken fans or anyone who listens to Locked On Kraken knows I love good defense. And so just looking at the numbers and having not really watched enough Stars games to go by my handy dandy eye test, I think I like what you're saying about defense. And it's definitely something that, just as someone who likes to watch hockey, I will be keeping a keen eye on, given that I think that's a place where I'd love to see the Seattle Kraken really elevate their game. And I know they're really trying to focus on a team defense, and it's hit or miss here. I kind of liken the Seattle Kraken and their performance to, like, trying to get a teenager to do, well, anything, sometimes it sticks and it's awesome, and other times it's like, okay, that's a no for today. So I'll be looking out for that. But let's flip the switch then. What would you say is maybe an Achilles heel? Like, if the Seattle Kraken could input a cheat code, what would they need to do in order to really expose the Dallas team?
Yeah, I think as far as weaknesses go, it's going to come down to putting the Stars on the penalty kill. It's been very inconsistent so far this season. The Stars do really well on special teams when they're on the man advantage, but there's been so many times this season where they've lost games because of they commit too many penalties, and the guys committing the penalties end up being valuable players on those penalty kill units. So whether it's defensemen or just defensive minded forwards, kind of like Luke Glendening or even Jamie Benn a little bit at times where he's at in his career, a guy that can have a nice physical presence on the ice during those, 4-man attempts. I think that's kind of been the overall overarching Achilles heel of this team. And especially, in some of those cases, I think back to early November, there was a game in Vancouver where the Stars gave up, I think, 2 or 3 power play goals to a Canucks power play unit that was bottom of the league, but it let the Canucks build up a nice, comfortable lead. And then the way the Stars team is wired, there's just not necessarily too many times that you're going to see the Stars come back from a multiple goal deficit. And so if the Stars find themselves down 2 or 3 goals, if you're the other team, you can almost lock in the win. We have recently seen the Stars take steps in the right direction in fixing that. Last Saturday, they played Pittsburgh. We're down 2-0 to a team that had won 10 straight coming into that game, but they found a way to, pull themselves out of the hole and come back and score 3 goals without having to force OT. And so maybe the Stars are turning a new leaf there. Maybe that was a one-off instance. But if you're going to be looking for a weakness to exploit for this Stars team, it's, put their best players in the penalty box and then take advantage while you have that extra man on the ice, because the Stars just haven't done very, very well in defending the penalty kill, as we saw in their most recent game on Sunday against the St. Louis Blues.
Yeah, and we've got the Blues coming up. So that's interesting. I know we're going to get into some predictions and whatnot. So I definitely think some of that intel will go into what I ultimately choose as my prediction for this series. But a lot of people, especially the teams that we played early on, have to, in some ways, or maybe this is obviously coming from my Seattle Kraken fandom bias, but it does seem as though, it's kind of like, all right, who's this new guy? Like, what are they about? I wonder if you get a vibe for what the players from Dallas or even the fans are thinking about, as we talked about at the top, having a new team come in and having to kind of figure the Seattle Kraken out.
Yeah, I think it's odd just because, geographically Dallas and Seattle are so far apart. And so, at least for myself, I know I'm kind of concerned more when it comes to the NHL on like the central teams in general. But I think you even mentioned near the top of the show as well, talking about how some people might count the Pacific Division as maybe not as competitive, which I think, the division as a whole has kind of, disputed that a little bit this season, with a team like Anaheim coming out of nowhere and, finding themselves kind of near the top of the standings. In Vegas, Calgary and Edmonton always competitive. And so it's certainly been interesting to watch. And, I haven't got to tune into too many Seattle games myself, because if they're not nationally televised, we're not getting a Seattle broadcast down here in Texas, unfortunately. But I think there's always a bit of excitement, with the new team, because it's kind of a blank slate, and it opens an opportunity for I guess rivalry is kind of a strong word, given since they haven't played a game, but you never know what kind of storylines can branch out from these kind of games, what kind of lore can be added to the overall NHL story that's been told over the past several years. And so I think there's a lot of excitement, and I'm sure it'll just be really interesting for fans at the American Airlines Center to see a new team and see what the turnout is as far as Seattle fans go here in Texas, because it's so night and day. Sometimes there will be a Stars game where it's 99% Stars fans in the crowd. And then all of us, we'll play a team from Canada or somewhere far up north, but they have a ton of fans down here in Texas. And so really, really curious to see kind of what the turnout is and what the reception is like from the Stars fans. But I think it's mostly positive and always exciting to watch another team as they enter a league, no matter what league it is.
Yeah, indeed. And we kind of talked about revenge games and Oleksiak. I know we'll be hearing from him in media over for Locked on Kraken and whatnot. It's always interesting, again, sometimes you get guys that I think it depends on how long they've been with the team too, right? That they make sure to chat with their old teammates. Sometimes they've even still got, a family and a house in their old market. And then you have Ryan Donato.
Yeah, yeah, I'm really excited to get to see Jamie back. He was always a guy that kind of flew under the radar for the Stars, but I mean, didn't really leave a bad taste in anyone's mouth. So I'm sure the fans will be excited to see him too. And always a fun guy to watch along the boards, because he was that guy for the Stars that could always just pack a big hit. And the fans in Dallas love big hits, which hockey fans in general do, but especially here in Texas, where things can
Yeah.
get a little rowdy at times.
Yeah, for sure. I wonder what happens when Alexiak lays the first hit. And will they cheer just by default, or have a
It
certain
might it'll
type
dep
of
it'll
feeling?
depend on who he hits. That's for sure.
Fair enough.
If he hits Yanni Hakanpää, it could be really interesting, because Hakanpää, who actually wears the same number 2 that Oleksiak wore here in Dallas, they're about the same size, and so that could be an unstoppable force and immovable object right there. So we'll see what happens.
Absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to it. And like I said, we're definitely going to get into some predictions for the game and do all of that. But like you said, we're going to shoot it over to our sponsors, Dane. Got beard? Get Primal. You heard me right. Got beard, get Primal. If you or someone you care about has a beard, it needs to get Primal. Maybe you're the person who has never considered the benefits of treating your beard with product. Primal Origin Oil will stop the itch and make your beard look healthy and groomed. The products are free from harmful synthetic ingredients and they have a low impact on the planet. Primal Origin oils make balms, oils, and whipped butter that are renowned as the best feel in beard products available. All products are fair trade certified and handcrafted in the US of A. The comb kits are a great gift, and if you're shopping for yourself, you'll be glad you got it. So, I know every company claims to have the best, but Primal Origin Oils challenges you, yes, you with your beard, to compare their ingredients to the feel that you have in your beard when you use other products, and they promise you will see and feel the difference. So head over to primaloriginoil.com and use promo code locked on, and that will get you 20% off at primaloriginoils.com. Promo code locked on for 20% off at Primal Origin Oils.
All right, welcome back in, everyone, to today's crossover episode between Locked On Stars and Locked On Kraken. Dane Lewis, Erica Ayala here to close out the show, give you some final thoughts going into tonight's matchup between the Stars and Kraken. And Erica, what are your overall thoughts, predictions for tonight's game as far as score, maybe a first goal scorer for the Kraken, things like that?
Wow. So if I was confident that the Seattle Kraken were going to win this game, I would definitely go with a score that we seem to really like, which is 4-3. Right around in there is where we usually are. And hearing you speak earlier that sometimes, if Dallas is down a couple goals, that is sometimes hard for them to overcome. If we could catch them still on the not so great side of that trend, that would be great. However, I'm not going to say that because you talked about defense. A team that's really skilled at defense, I think, is going to have the advantage over the Seattle Kraken, if we're being honest. A team that, as you said, is usually at the disadvantage. Well, I guess every team is at the disadvantage if they're not scoring first. But the Seattle Kraken are not usually the team that scores first. And that's something that I'd like to see them work on. And a team that has a little bit more discipline, a little bit more patience, and is really refined on the defensive side, again, I think will have the advantage over the Seattle Kraken. So again, just kind of looking at the stats, looking at what Dallas usually puts up and what they usually give up, I'd have to say that I'll give you three. I'll give you 3-2 in favor of Dallas. I'm just going to be honest.
Yeah, I certainly can see the game unfolding that way as well. It's weird because the Dallas Stars always play really well against the better teams in the league. They've beaten Colorado this season. They've beaten Edmonton, Calgary, Colorado, Florida. But whenever they play these kind of middle of the pack or lower tier teams like LA, they've lost twice to Ottawa this season, which is like 50% of Ottawa's wins so far. Uh, it, things can just get weird. And so there's a little bit of a concern for me for the Stars going into this game. But given what happened to them on Sunday, blowing a late game lead to their rivals, the Blues, I think that there's going to be a little bit of a fire for this team. And this is almost kind of a must-win game for a team that's looking to kind of regain some ground in the Central Division standings. Because with I think they had 5 or 6 games off, and all of those were division games. They lost a little bit of ground as far as points go, and I think they're sitting around that 6 or 5 spot in the division. And so these would be a huge 2 points for the Stars to get before they'd go to Florida this weekend and play the Panthers and Lightning in back-to-back games. And I just can't envision the Stars coming out of that weekend with 4 points, as nice as that would be. So I'll kind of follow suit with you with it. I think it could be a close game. It could almost be a trap kind of game for the Stars. And I'll say score of 4-2, but it wouldn't surprise me maybe if that 4th goal for the Stars comes off an empty net from Seattle, bringing on that 6th attacker to try to tie things up at the end.
Yeah, that sounds about right too. I also heard you say that if there were an Achilles heel to expose, it would be essentially the Seattle Kraken exposing the team on the power play. That is not one of our strong suits. So, yeah, an empty netter trying to get it close late in the game. That sounds about right too.
Yeah, and do you have a first goal prediction for the Kraken?
Oh, first goal. Let's see. You know what? I'm gonna go with the hot hand or the hot stick here, and go with Jared McCann. That's actually another player that easily I could have mentioned. He was with Jaden Schwartz, Jordan Eberle coming out of preseason and early on. That line obviously has gotten mixed up with Schwartz now, on the injured reserve, but McCann can score in this league, and I think he's been a great asset. So, and he, was looking great uh, in the game that we just played. So, I'll go with McCann.
Good deal. Yeah, I think he's second on Seattle in points, so definitely a guy that the Stars will need to be mindful of, as well as Eberle, who I know is first on the team in points as of right now. And for the Stars on their side of things, I think it's hard to bet against the top line, and it's going to be either that Rupe Hintz, Jason Robertson, or Joe Pavelski. Um, I'll go Pavelski this game. I feel like he didn't score in their last game against St. Louis, but all three of those guys have played pretty well coming off of this pause, and so I hope that if the Stars are able to take advantage of I guess lesser opponent in Seattle, if that's what you want to call it, that the top line can kind of lead the way offensively and get things going and help the Stars get two crucial points before hitting the road for Florida.
Yeah, well, it looks like we're pretty much in line with what they have as the players to watch over on NHL.com. But I mean, hey, it means we know our stuff there. But it's interesting to hear you talk about kind of Dallas maybe I don't want to say playing down, but maybe not always commanding the pace of the game. That is definitely something that I think the Seattle Kraken need to learn how to do. That being said, we've also found success against Florida, and we're going to be pretty much on a back to back here. So I wonder if we see Chris Drieger in net, or if he'll maybe get the start in St. Louis, who we have up next. But Drieger just brings a different type of energy. He can really be wild and come out of the crease in some dangerous ways, but in some ways, I almost will take that mistake because at least he's going for it, as opposed to what I kind of talked about earlier. So we'll see. I think what we see goaltending wise could be interesting as well. But overall, I think it's going to be. We're not in the same situation, obviously, as Dallas. I think it's obviously not a must win as far as the standings are concerned, but I do think after all of the time that the Seattle Kraken had to practice, and for them to give up that first goal the way they did in Colorado, not a great look. Did bounce back. We talked about the response goals, but again, it's that teenager mentality that we're still seeing, and they still have to establish some consistency. And so I'd like to see them do that against Dallas, Dane. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I sure would take it.
Yeah, and I certainly am always a fan of a competitive hockey game. So maybe that loss to Colorado and sparks a fire under the team, and certainly a challenging road trip for the Kraken playing Colorado, who's on fire, Dallas, who's just always a coin flip of what you're going to get, and then St. Louis right after is no easy task, as Stars fans know good and well. So really, really excited for this first matchup between the Stars and Kraken. Hopefully, the first installment of what ends up being a really fun competitive series over the years.
Oh, absolutely, which just means we'll have to do more crossover episodes.
Yeah, it sounds like it. We'll have to do more Squadcast, as you call them. So I like that name a lot. It makes it sounds a little more spicy than just a crossover episode.
Oh, I love the spice, that's for sure.
All about the spice here at the Locked On Podcast Network. But Erica, thank you for joining the show today. Seattle Kraken fans, glad that I could grace your earbuds as well. You can find both of us on social media. I'm on Twitter at Dane_Lewis. And Erica, where can the people find you at?
You can find me at elindsay08. That's ELINDSAY08. And looking forward to in just a few weeks' time here, offering some Olympic coverage also for the Locked On Podcast Network.
Yeah, very excited for that. I know Olympics going to look a little bit different without NHL players, but still exciting to cover nonetheless, as it's hockey on the national stage. So always a good time there for sure.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again, Dan, and we'll do it again soon.
Yeah, absolutely.